Hello and welcome to this week's series of topics, the common topics and commonplaces. A continuation, in a sense, of stasis theory, a little bit of overlap, and some other aspects of rhetoric to help us find the available means of persuasion before we get into more specific kinds of proofs and arguments. There's still some important preliminary kinds of ideas to learn about here and talk about here this week. So again, as usual, we'll talk a little bit about some definitions, and I'll give you some, factual history just to get a good grounding in, the world of classical rhetoric here. Since this class is more than just making a paper, I want to get you a little bit of better understanding of the ideas in communication history, things like that, and look at the three common topics from Aristotle that have been with us for quite so long, and then in a couple of videos, we'll look at commonplaces and the beliefs of the community, and we'll close with some practical steps on what to do with them, and then that'll lead us into our stasis theory and common topics assignment here for this week. So today we'll look briefly here at the common topics, some history, then as we'll say, move on to more specific aspects of what they are. In the Greek world, a topic similar to the kinds of topics that you have been thinking about and writing about in various classes over the years, right? What kinds of ideas and things you think about and write about and talk about? These are the topics that have been part of human interaction and conversation for millennia, right? And the classical Greek world had them in such a way of where the arguments are located, the generational procedure to create arguments, right? And some topics have been around for so long, you've been using them over the years in many classes without possibly even knowing that this is what you've been doing. In arrangement, as we'll see soon enough, there's some important topics like definition and division, arranging, organizing your ideas, and giving concrete, specific meanings to the terms that you're using, even comparing and contrasting. A basic skill that you've been using for so long now has really been part of the classical common topic system that developed out of Aristotle's favorite dialectical mode of engaging with ideas into the level of rhetoric. So you may hopefully be already a little bit assured that this issue of the common topics is something that you've been sort of familiar with already, maybe without even knowing it, for quite some time. As the history of rhetoric moved into the Latin world, and the Latin world sort of developed those common topics into the sort of commonplaces of everyday thought, as we'll look at again more specifically in a couple of videos. These are the ideas, the knowledge that the community held together, the things, the basic premises, the basic ideas, the things that people of a certain group or community or some sort of association, these are the ideas that basically make up that group, the reason why they are together, and what they believe and why they believe these things together, maybe for political reasons or social, economic reasons, philosophical issues, whatever it might be. These commonplaces, the things that basically unite a group or whatever sort of organization of people, whether almost accidentally from birth and whatever community and neighborhood situations or whatever it might be, things out of your control, or even things that you start to choose as you develop and mature, the kinds of things that you believe, the things that you hold in common with others, an important aspect that we'll cover again in more detail. So, again, a little bit of brief history. Way back to where we first started talking about things together in 10th grade, the common topics were aids to memory from Homer and his bards, all those sorts of early epithets and things that we talked about in world literature that brought the memory and the common experience to the audience together. And these were the things that everybody could understand and talk about, and that's why they're common topics, that you don't have to have a whole lot of special knowledge to understand them, that they are familiar and sort of community property in a sense. Right? And so eventually, as the structure of rhetoric became more formalized, the topics became memorized and expanded and more formalized as well. And we got to the point, realized, as you said before, with epideictic, the sort of ceremonial language, that there is almost a stock kind of thing or topic or just the things that are said at various sort of ceremonies and funerals or wedding ceremonies, they become almost formulaic in a sense, and these are the common topics that are used and that occur during epideictic sort of language. So those sorts of oratory are very much driven by common topics, the things that are said again and again, the kinds of songs that are sung at Christmas time or New Year's Eve, things like that. These are the familiar patterns and linguistic habits that have made up this sort of area of human discourse. But in forensic and deliberative, and as you remember, we're using mostly deliberative rhetoric here for this class, that there are still some sort of common language, common ideas, or the common topics that fit those kinds of experiences. Some of the as you said, the kinds of familiar topics that you've been using, division, compare, contrast, we'll see them again in arrangement, as well as talk about them a little bit here in invention. For Aristotle, since it is very much built upon how to converse and get along with classical society, the more you read about it, if you were to read some of the other, and there are certainly dozens of textbooks on classical rhetoric and sources of classical rhetoric, and some of the treatises by Socrates and or about Socrates, really, Isocrates and Gorgias, some of the other philosophers that we've been mentioning in some of these slideshows. You read what they wrote, probably in English translation, you'll see that by the time Aristotle gets a hold of these ideas, they seem somewhat dated, which is not too surprising for Aristotle in the classical world, but with a little bit of modification here, we will try to make them more understandable and useful here today. And why are they called the common topics? Really because, as we said a few moments ago, these kinds of three major ideas fit almost any sort of argument. Once you have a good grasp of these topics, that you can talk about them and with about any sort of subject matter, just about. You can talk about conjecture, degree, possibility. As you can see, it sounds very much like what we talked about last week with stasis theory, but again, that's the overlap is on purpose. The special topics are for really some sort of area in which you need some sort of specialized training, and we'll obviously leave that up to you for your individual thesis and what you're going to talk about. So the conjecture, degree, and possibility will be the subject of our next video.